Hey everyone, welcome to Momentum Boost. I am your host, Adrienne Gold Davis, and I really am honored that you're joining me tonight. So the holiday of Shavuot is quickly upon us, and in many ways, Shavuot is one of the most underappreciated Jewish holidays of the year. And it is about more than just blintzes and cheesecake, although we do eat dairy products during this time. But have you ever wondered why? Well, it was at Mount Sinai that we actually received the laws of keeping kosher. So we needed to make a few adjustments in our outdoor desert kitchens, right? But also because of the Torah texts that call Israel, which is our ultimate destination, a land that flows with milk and honey. Or in Song of Songs, where it says that milk and honey are under our tongues. And while on Shavuot, we read the book of Ruth, we also focus on that gift that keeps on giving, which is the Ten Commandments. Now it's considered really the ultimate top 10 list of moral and ethical decency. For we Jews, those laws are actually category headers that contain within each of them a sum of 613 commandments, or mitzvahs. Now, the word mitzvah can be translated as connection. In fact, my favorite, Rabbi Steve Freeman, once wrote that the word mitzvah is related to the Aramaic word savta, which means to join or to attach. Savta can mean companionship or personal attachment. And in this sense, he explains, a mitzvah kind of bundles up the person who's commanded with the commander. And that creates a relationship and an essential bond. So in a sense, the mitzvahs are kind of like the laws of engagement for Jews to maximize the potential of our bodies and our souls. Now, for some of us, those 10 commandments are fundamental and intuitive, but for modern sensibilities, and especially when it comes to teaching our children, it's important for us to have tangible and practical ways to explain them to others in the language and with the examples that we can all relate to. And it's for that reason that I have invited a brilliant Jewish educator, and for full disclosure, a very dear personal friend, to join me tonight. So Ellie Bass is a Jewish educator. She's a teacher. She's a certified coach. She's a personal trainer. She's a healer. She's a nachash machine for her mother, I can tell you that. And she applies all of those modalities and so many more with the goal of facilitating actual self-development, optimal health, and creating a meaningful life, cultivating impactful relationships for all of her students and all of her fortunate clients. She's also the director of the Yetta Nashman Jewish Family Institute in Toronto, Canada. She's a mom to two amazing teens who I know and love. And she's the host of two ongoing fantastic hit podcasts and a budding wildcrafter. And she'll have to tell me a little bit more about that because I don't even know what that means. But you can learn more about Ellie if you want to, and her fabulous work at myjfi.com or elliebass.com. In the meantime, please join me in welcoming my former work wife, Ms. Ellie Bass. Hi, darling.
Hi, Adrienne. This is so much fun. We so rarely get to share an office together. So this is really, really so lovely. I'm so excited.
Ellie, it's going to be very hard to be serious. I know that what we're talking about is a very deep and integral part of Jewish life, but those glasses are to die. I
would say that right back at you. I feel like we're really doing some good glasses advertising right now.
We are. I think we are too. We'll be like, poster girls. So, darling, I think it's really important for Shavuot that we look at the 10 Commandments through the lens of modern language. All those thous and those and thous, and it can be very frustrating for people, and a lot of people don't really understand it. Beginning with the first one, which is called a commandment, but isn't really a commandment. How can you call it a commandment with the grammar the way it is? So I'll start, and then you can go on to the second one and back and forth, and let's just interrupt each other and have fun, okay?
Love it. Awesome.
Okay, so I want to start with the first, which is, I am the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt. That sounds like a statement to me. Am I right?
It is such a strange commandment because, it's just sort of saying what's going on. So how does it work?
Well, so for me, the way that I've looked at it and the way that's really been useful for me to try and kind of give it over, I often quote Dostoevsky because, I like to do that sort of thing. And I think he understood it the best when he wrote in the Brothers Karamazov, that book? He said, without God, all is permissible. So I am the Lord your God is number one on the list of the top 10, because if that wasn't number one, what have you got left? You got nothing. Without this belief in God, mankind sort of loses its rationale for acting in a noble way and to be a being that's created in the divine image. But the way that I learned that really moved me, so many people know this expression, an eye for an eye, right? It's become one of those lines in the Torah people throw around in all faith systems. But I like to think of it as, instead of an I-E-Y-E, as in an eye for an eye as an eye for an eye, meaning many of us have struggled with the concept that there even is a God. They can't define it, they can't see it, so it's hard for them to accept it. And the default of that, particularly in our culture and our times, is to think that we are the center of the universe. So the first step in keeping that commandment, I think, is to recognize that it's not, I am the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt. It's not you. You change the I, which is the more self-centered, more egocentric version of seeing yourself as the controller, as the master manipulator, and you hand it over outside of yourself to the greater I, the I, which is the first word in the first commandment. So my way of looking at it is, with this commandment, you exchange an eye for an I, ego, for an I, the ultimate source of everything. So while it is phrased as a statement, I think it is the underpinning of all the other laws, because if you don't buy into the fact that you're not the center of the universe, it's very hard to believe that there's any non-contingent, objective, first cause morality. So that's where I want to go. So let's leave that one for now and just go directly into the second one. The second one is complicated, and that's why I gave it to you.
Although it makes me think, when you were talking about the eye for an eye, also this idea that it's a role modeling commandment. It's not telling us like directly what to do, but it's showing us how we can do it. So interesting when you say that, because especially if we're talking about parenting is so centered on role modeling. And so it's the first time I've kind of ever thought of it that way. So I'm so happy you described it, like that we're role modeling being part of something bigger than ourselves.
Well, it's interesting you should say that. We'll get to it when we get to the fifth commandment, I would imagine. But really, they say that it is the bridge commandment, that honoring your parents is the bridge commandment to understanding and honoring of power greater than yourself. So you're right. That is the underlying parenting trope, isn't it? To accept at a certain point that something other than you gave you life and cognition and will and movement.
Beautiful. Yeah. I love that. And I feel like, whenever we have a list in Torah, it's never random. It's never like that grocery list where you just add stuff just because you just remembered it. Right. It's always like in order. It's in a Seder of some kind. So it's so interesting then that we go from role modeling, we move into thinking about how do we think about ourselves. And the second commandment being not to have graven images or worship idols, which in today's day is such a weird thing to think about, right? We can't even imagine like that people would worship idols, but it's so interesting. I was listening to a speaker today, and he was talking about how our sages understood that there was a time in the world where, just as addictive as it is today to like look at your phone or watch celebrities or scroll on TikTok, it was just as addictive in that time to worship idols, that we can no more understand the desire to worship idols as we can understand prophecy today. But that's the state of the world. And so it's hard for us to imagine it. So if we take it into the things today, so I would say two things about graven images and worshiping idols. So to not have a graven image is an image that's carved into stone. Okay. And to me, when we think about an image that's carved into stone, I always think about this: are my ideas fixed or are my ideas flexible? And so a carved image is pushing us to ask a question, especially as parents. What are the parts of the ways that I think about the world that are too rigid? They're too fixed. They're too dug in.
Hmm.
And can we take a look at some of those ideas and get curious? Can we allow for multiple perspectives? Can we ask questions of maybe things that we always thought were unquestionable? And that's really important too, because only God is perfect. If Jewishly we talk about the idea of perfect, only God is perfect, which means that our ideas need revisiting on a regular basis and updating.
Wow.
And if we put that together with the idea of worshiping idols, I think if we look out into the world today, as I mentioned, what are the things that we worship? There's a great book called Strange Rites that explores the idea that today we're just as religious as ever. We just don't always point that towards God.
Oh, wow. Give me an example.
Fascinating.
Give me an example.
So for instance, I think that the environment is absolutely imperative to take care of, but there are people who are religious about the environment in terms of their practice, in terms of their community, in terms of their way of thinking, the same way somebody would be religious, say, about Judaism. And so that all of these different ways that we apply ourselves, and certainly the way that we worship celebrity, or we worship money, or we worship influence, speaks to what we're saying about the dangers of worshiping something that, as you said, isn't necessarily greater than us, isn't necessarily the creator of the universe. Wow. So I feel like these two pieces of this one commandment are saying to us, re-examine your values and your principles. Because as a parent, you need to know what you stand for and what you're going to build the foundation of your family on. And so if we re-examine our values and our principles, we're saying, what ideas maybe do we have that are too fixed? And what things do we worship in the world that maybe actually don't align with the values and principles that we'd like to have in our family?
Oh, I love that. And you know what? The truth is that when an adult models for their children the ability, the flexibility of being able to say, this is what I thought, and now I realize I was not correct. It unconsciously gives permission to children to do the same.
Huge. So it models growth, that we're all still learning and we're all still growing, and there's no bigger gift that you can give your kids.
I love that. I love it. I love that, we have, as we work on becoming anti-fragile, so many of us stay rigid because it's threatening to the ego to be able to back off from any entrenched ideas that may no longer suit their or fit their purpose. And when a child sees that, it also teaches them that they don't have to go along with something because they used to. So I think that's a very interesting point.
And such a powerful remedy for some of the challenges that we're facing in the world today, where people get very stuck on a side and can't hear other ideas and get curious.
Yeah, for sure. This is, I'm interviewing Zohar Raviv. You'll listen to it coming up. And he talks about this as well. It's not our opinion so much as our inability to discuss them that we've carved in stone, and they become we become idolatrous to a position, to a wing, if you will. And because we live in such a, what do you call it? That
like an echo chamber.
An echo chamber. That was the word I was looking for. Then all we do is reinforce it. Also, did you know, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but the prohibition against getting a tattoo, which is, so ubiquitous today, and, raises a lot of questions. The original reason for that was because idol worshipers used to tattoo the god that they were worshiping or the statue that they were worshiping. And that was something that we were supposed to stay far away from, but that's a whole other discussion.
That is so interesting. I had heard different reasons, but that is fascinating. And it really speaks to, what does our life reflect? The practices and the things that we do and we spend our time on, and how we make our choices. What values and principles do they reflect? So I love that. That's fascinating.
So you're right. Of course, Chazal, our sages talk about other examples too, but that one really struck me. It's the same reason that you're not supposed to a man's not supposed to cut off his sideburns, because, and this is another notion, that when they worshiped idols, because the idol, unless it's a chia pet, in the year 2010, can't grow hair. So they would shave their whole head so that the image that they looked more like the image that they were worshiping. It's fascinating. Anyway, let's go to number 3. So, Lori Palatnik, God bless her, who started Momentum, has this whole thing she does with her fingers about what each one stands for. And 3 is, of course, not to take God's name in vain. And she always goes, oh my God, which is something that I say all the time. Unfortunately, I try and switch it to gosh, but it just kind of slips out. But, for our purposes, what seems modern to me about this is I think we know that no pious person would ever believe that a God, a good, loving God, would demand of themselves that they blow themselves up in a marketplace or at the end of some kind of a marathon run in order to sanctify the name of God and use God's name. God is great, as they implode themselves on a group of people and cause damage. And those horrific murders that we've seen so much of in the 21st century are really the most modern examples of religious fanaticism, where we do use God's name in a way that promotes wickedness. And, the truth is, I kind of hate to say this, but when you look at over the last few years, the name Bernie Madoff, the name Jeffrey Epstein and Harvey Weinstein, when you clearly know a person is a Jew and you're behaving in an immoral way, you are defaming God's name. You're carrying God's name in vain. Now, David Klinghoffer, a writer, he wrote a book called Shattered Tablets, said, that when he explained this commandment, he said, it involves lifting up of God's name for falsehood, the way you would lift up a flag or a banner. For example, if a ship flies under the flag of a country with false pretenses, he says, we call it sailing under false colors. That's where the expression came from. So people often sail under false covers, something he explains, and they claim a distinction or an affiliation that they don't actually possess. But Ellie, I have to tell you a story about this commandment, which sits with me no matter how many times I think about it. It still makes my skin crawl, and it's something
I love your stories. I'm super excited.
I may have told you this because it happened like 15 years ago. It was when H&M first opened in Toronto, and I went to buy a new outfit to wear to shul the next day. And I bought this outfit. It was like, the color was salmon. It was a cardigan and a shirt with a bow neck and the skirt that matched it. And I loved it. I thought, oh, this is so different from me. I always wear black and navy. And I got up that morning and nobody, not my husband, not my kids, said a word. And I got to shul, not you. You didn't say, oh, you look nice. And that was unforgivable. And nobody else that I saw.
That was the problem.
What did you say?
I said I didn't have my glasses on. That was the problem.
Thank you. Judging favorably. Love you. Nobody said a word. So when I got back, I realized, you know what? I said to my husband, Jason, is this not good? And he goes, no, color's terrible on you. So I took it off. I packed it up. I folded it up because, of course, I'd left the tags on. And I put it back in the box and I took it back to H&M and I stood in line. Now, you don't get me wrong. I was already very religious, right? Like I thought of myself as very religious. And I got to the lineup and I waited and I waited and I waited and I waited in the lineup. When I finally got up to the front, the woman said to me, how can I help you? And I said, I need to return this. And she said, has it been worn? And I went, oh my God, no. And I went, in that moment, not only did I use God's name in vain and lie and steal, it's like all of the commandments went, blah, 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 blah. And I thought, how can this be so? And I realized that because God's name meant so much to me, I was 1 inch away from using it in vain. And then, of course, I was mortified, and I'd read somewhere that if you embarrass yourself, all your sins are forgiven. So I said, well, actually, I did wore it. I wore it for a couple of hours, and I left the tags on because I wasn't sure, and nobody liked it. And I went on, and everybody's rolling their eyes. And she turned to me and she said, you can still return that here at H&M if it's worn. I went, okay, thanks, bye. So aside from swearing, the idea that we carry God's name in our identities, in our behaviors, with our last names, we are the flag. We are the ship that sails for God. And when we use God's name in vain, when we use it, God forbid, for violence or to tell a lie, like I did that time, that's why it's so high up there. So, yeah.
It always reminds me of the book by Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, Not in God's Name, where he really explores that idea in such a such a moving, impactful way. But I always actually love that story because it's so much a story of learning how it feels when you're doing it. And it really is it's so perfect. I love it.
And we fall so quickly. Oh, how the mighty fall. It was horrifying. Would have been better to have a cheeseburger with bacon strips all over it on Yom Kippur. Okay.
As long as you weren't wearing the shirt at the time and then tried to return it.
I've done that. Okay, go to 4 because gosh, we don't have the whole night and there's so many to go through. Go to 4.
So number 4 is honoring keeping Shabbat. So Shabbat is really one of the ways that I like to talk about it with my students is relationship day. Shabbat is all about focusing on the relationships. It's relationship with ourselves, it's relationship with others, and it's relationship with Hashem. And so, but how do we do that? And a lot of the time when people think about the Shabbat, they think about restrictions, like, oh, it's the day where you can't do all that stuff. But interestingly enough, when we're commanded to honor and keep Shabbat, it's a proactive commandment. It's actually telling you to do something. Right. So Shabbat is proactively saying to us, in order to take care of your relationships, you have to be proactive. You can't just not do certain things. You have to do certain things.
Nice.
So we often focus on the idea of disconnecting in order to connect on Shabbat. But that's also focusing on what we shouldn't do. Whereas this is saying, if you want to have connection, here are some of the ways that you can do that. And Shabbat gives us the opportunity to learn that the 2 things that are the most precious and irreplaceable are our time and our attention. And so Shabbat gives us an opportunity to choose where we are going to put our attention and how we are going to spend our time in ways that aren't structured by the rest of the world.
Nice.
And when we do that, we get to say, what is the most important to us? Which relationships are the most important? It's the relationship with ourselves, the relationship with Hashem, and the relationship with those in our families or in our communities that are the most important to us. Because we have lots of relationships these days. We can have 3,000 friends on this and 4 million followers on here and tons of relationships. But on Shabbat, we say, these are the ones that matter. And here's how I'm going to show you. I'm going to disconnect from all those other things, and I'm going to pay time and attention and make sure that that is applied to what is most important. So I love the idea that Shabbat really gives us an opportunity, again, to clarify what's important to us. And the beauty of doing that when you have kids is you model for them that we prioritize the things that are important to us. And the way we show that something or someone is important is with our time and with our attention.
Oh, I love that. That's exquisite. Thank you for that. I love it.
I always think of it as a date night. It's like date night for all the things, all the people we care about.
I love it. Okay, so we'll go to the 5th.
Let's do it.
Obviously, we could spend 3 months on the 5th commandment. It's honor your mother and father. And it can be a thorny one. And clearly it sounds like a parenting commandment right off the bat. But the truth is there are also commandments that say that you're not allowed to make it impossible for your children to honor you. So the onus is not just on the children, it's also on the parent not to put a stumbling block in front of a child. It is foundational, as I said earlier, because it helps us really understand that there is an element of gratitude due to the people who gave you life. If somebody saved your life, you would be the first one to remember them on the annual, right? But if someone gave you life, now, there are also very fraught relationships, and there are many, many questions about what do you do when your parents aren't so honorable or so on. But, I guess tonight's the night where I'm going to be falling on my sword and telling you all my shameful truths. But I learned this lesson in such a significant way from a rabbi. Not long after I started to keep kosher, which is like 22 years ago or something, I was at a Shabbat dinner. Everybody was going around the table talking about, this one was saying, well, I try not to gossip anymore. And this one's saying, oh, I do this. And it came to me and I went, okay, I'm completely kosher. I don't eat kosher and kosher food out of the house. I don't eat kosher food in the house. Everything in my house is strictly kosher. And you cannot imagine how hard that was for me because I came from a house where, my father used to say his favorite meal was roast suckling pig. And, we grew up on pork chops and going on and on and on. Rabbi took me into the kitchen and he said to me, young lady, kosher food might be going in your mouth, but treif, unkosher food, is coming out of it. I don't see anything in the top 10 commandments about keeping kosher, but I do see a law right in the center that says honor your parents. And that includes speaking of them as though they are distinguished people, recognizing the weight, the heaviness of the fact that someone gave you light. He said, so I'm very glad you're proud of yourself, but you got a really long way to go because everything you've eaten, you've made unkosher. It was powerful. You know, on the basics, you're not supposed to sit in your parents' chair. You're not supposed to call your parents by their first name. Many, many parents think it's really cute when their kids call them by their first name. These are all Torah laws. You know, you have to look after your parents. And of course, there's boundaries. If you have abusive parents, there are boundaries that you can put into place and they are codified. But by and large, what I learned from that is the acknowledgement and consequently the conversation that shows your parents as dignified, decent people. And like I said, we could spend 3 months on this.
Yeah, it's such a challenging commandment on so many levels. But I'll tell you, you know, if we want to go right into the next one, I love that the rabbi pulled you aside. You know, I think that that is such a unique piece of Jewish practice. Like not just what we say, and not just when we say it, but sometimes where we say it. And it actually takes us right into the next commandment, because even though the next commandment is don't murder, which seems kind of like obvious. And truthfully, it's almost one of the hardest ones to apply, because it's like, yeah, of course, I'm not going to go out and murder someone. Most of the average people are not going to be in that position. Right. But for us to be able to apply it to ourselves, we're going to take it to a place in the Talmud where they liken something to murder. And the thing that they liken to murder is embarrassing another person. That we hold that embarrassing or humiliating another person is on the same level as murdering somebody. In fact, it gives an example of how we describe someone who's embarrassed or humiliated, right? That the blood drains from their face, that they want the ground to open up beneath them. Some people will say like, oh my gosh, I just wanted to disappear. And so our language belies this deep truth that the Talmud is saying to us, which is when you embarrass another person, we liken it to murder. And so don't murder, we can also apply here. And so when we think about it, what the rabbi did by pulling you aside. So what does this mean? It means we don't put up with bad behavior. Like you said, there's boundaries around all of these things, that we don't allow somebody to just simply do something and then we don't say something to them because we don't want to embarrass them.
Right.
But we do try to discipline in private and praise in public.
Yes.
That we really try to protect the dignity of another person because they are created in the image of God, just like we are. And the same way that we would want somebody to potentially pull us aside and say something to us in a way that isn't embarrassing for us, but that we can learn from, we are supposed to do that for other people. So the idea that we're going to point to tonight, because like you said, we can go so many ways with so many of these commandments. But I think we're going to go with this idea of not embarrassing another person, because we see Jewishly embarrassing another or humiliating another person as likened to murder. And that what we do is we do our best to treat other people with dignity and respect. And sometimes even in the hardest places, like you said, sometimes with parents, but also sometimes in our families, when you get so familiar with other people, sometimes you forget that, like, probably I shouldn't say that. This, oh, we're all family here. I can make that joke. But more often than not, you're still embarrassing somebody. You're still making somebody that you love and feel close to not feel good about themselves in that moment. And we have an idea in Torah that's called Kal V'Chomer. So if it's true here, it's even more true over there. Right. So that if we wouldn't say that about a stranger because we wouldn't want to embarrass them, so much more so with our family.
Oh, that's beautiful.
So as parents, I think we can take this don't murder commandment and apply it to using our words and making sure that we're instilling dignity and respect and modeling for our kids how powerful our words are and how we can use them to bring a person up rather than bring a person down.
Oh, I love that take on it. Love it. So if we go on to 7, of course, is not to commit adultery. Now, I'm not going to go into what adultery constitutes or any of that, but I think we understand that this is the idea that there are boundaries in a marriage. And, you know, Rabbi Benjamin Blech, who's a brilliant writer, a great rabbi, said that it really takes courage to defy a culture that actually glamorizes sexual promiscuity, glorifies our obsession with pornography, and our over-sexualized society. It teaches our young people to believe that physical pleasure is the greatest good and sexiness trumps character and intelligence and all other human achievements. And casual sex and hookup culture has given us this problematic dynamic. There was a time where people understood that marriage was sacred and that the boundaries around marriage were sacred. But what I think that our culture doesn't understand anymore is that boundaries do not repress. Boundaries give space for creativity and growth. So I'm going to leave that for now because it's a family show. Lots more to go in here too. I'm going to invite you to do number 8.
Okay, number 8. So number 8 is don't steal. So again, we could look at this one and say, oh, obviously, but I wanted to point us towards one of the, I would say it actually relates back to the first commandment, because it relates back to this idea of giving credit where credit is due. That stealing is taking ownership of something that isn't yours. And we can steal people's time, we can steal their hard work, we can steal credit. And the beautiful reason why we focus here on giving credit where credit is due is because if we don't steal, the opposite of wanting what someone else has is appreciating what you already have. And so the antidote to stealing is really having gratitude and basing your outlook on life on appreciating what you've been given. So mentioning those people whose shoulders you stand on, right? Honoring parents, right? That now we see how these commandments start to build one on top of another, right? When we acknowledge what we got from our parents, when we teach our kids to acknowledge where they come from, we teach them about their ancestry or a teacher who affected us. Right? We start to talk about our ancestors or our mentors. I mean, every single time we go to shul, we're reading the story of where we came from and acknowledging that we stand on the shoulders of giants. And by doing that, we get gratitude and a real feeling that what we have has been given to us.
Oh, nice.
And then what comes with a deep sense of gratitude is a sense that now I have a responsibility to do something with that and to give back.
Oh, I love it.
Parenting in this way is like modeling that we're part of something bigger than ourselves, and stealing is thinking that I'm the only one that matters and I never have enough. Right? It comes from that. A friend of mine used to call it poverty consciousness, like this certain feeling of like there's never enoughness. Right? The opposite of Dayenu that we just finished singing on Passover was gratitude models. I matter because I've received so much. And not only that, I have even more to give. So it gives us the flip side of where stealing feels like we have nothing. Gratitude makes us feel like we have everything. And then we can do something with that in the world.
I love it. I love that take on it. So in our last few minutes, I'm going to go to commandment 9 really quickly, and then I'll give you 10. I wish, you know what, we have to come back and do this again and really unpack them further, maybe one at a time over the course of the next while.
I love that. That'd be so fun. Plus, I'll just get to spend more time with you, which is always
correct. That's correct. And I'm going to get matching glasses, so we'll be twinsies. Now, listen, Ellie, we know that commandment 9 is not to bear false witness, but it's a mistake to assume that that commandment really just concerns itself with testimony in a courtroom, right? We know that words destroy reputations. We know that they can destroy friendships, they can destroy families, and they can hurt even more. You know, sticks and stones break your bones, but names will never hurt me is just an utter lie. We know that gossip, somebody called it once social sewage for your ears, which I thought was brilliant. But it really, it's the major focus of media. It's the constant theme of all of our conversations, and it's a disease. And in the Torah, actually, it was more than a sin. It was like considered a sickness. You've got, well, you know, they call it leprosy, but it's really, you know, tsaras, this skin condition. Eleanor Roosevelt once famously said that great minds discuss ideas, average minds discuss events, and small minds discuss people. So when I think of false testimony, since we can never actually know what's going on in anyone else's life, since, until you've walked in a person's shoes, you can't understand. And since we meet people in chapter 3 to talk about anyone in a derisive or negative way, really is false testimony, because we can never know. So that's where I go with false testimony in number 9.
So powerful.
Wrap it up for me in 10.
So powerful. And so to sort of quickly put it on one foot, the last commandment is not to covet. And not coveting allows us almost to do all of the other things that came before it. So you can sort of read it backwards and forwards. Sure. But really, coveting is like one of the baseline for all the commandments, because what is it saying? What is it charging us with? It's saying be in reality. And what does it mean being in reality? Jewishly, as a human, it means having humility. And Jewish humility is not about being a shmata. Right? We're not, when we say be humble, sit down, right? We're saying, don't think less of yourself. I believe that was a quote, maybe from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, like humility isn't thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. Right. But what we're saying in this case is humility allows us Jewishly to know what are our challenges and what are our gifts, and that both of those were given to us. That the things that we have and the things that we don't have are exactly the way it's supposed to be.
And for that reason, that corresponds with the first commandment. Because if you're coveting other people's stuff, essentially you're saying that there is no God, or if there is, he made some cosmic error and you don't have what you're supposed to have.
That's exactly it. And I love how that ties together. So the whole idea is like, okay, let's come down to brass tacks now. Let's get real. Let's get humble and look at our lives and really appreciate what we have and be in reality. Because if you're not in reality, you can't set real goals and then make a practical plan to get there. So not coveting, the antidote to coveting is to really look at your life and take full responsibility for it. And with humility and grace, look forward and say, here's how I'd like my life to be. I'm not going to covet what you have. I'm going to say what I want my life to be, and I'm going to make a plan to get there.
I love that. And I also love, as a parenting model, to be able to say to your children, listen, what you have is what you're supposed to have at this moment.
That's right.
If you want more, you can make a plan to have those things, but don't think for one minute that God made some cosmic error, that everything that is in front of you is for you, and that our greatness isn't going to come through what we get. It's going to come through who we are in the face of what we get.
Man,
oh, Ellie.
Beautiful.
Ellie, I wish we had 2 more hours. I wish we had 2 more days. It just flew by. I'm so honored to have you with me this evening.
I'm totally so thrilled we had a chance to do this, and I'm going to appreciate it with gratitude and totally love the time we had together. It feels like a delicious, nutritious snack. So thank you. Thank you for having me.
But I do covet a bit more time with you. Okay. Thank you. And to all of you out there in Momentum Land, again, thank you for joining us this evening. And remember, with Shavuot on the horizon and this top 10 list of moral bottom lines, just know that as we learn and grow together, that the highest form of wisdom will always be kindness. Shavuot Sameach to all of you.
I've got 1,000 questions coming from deep within.